to welcome you to the League of Women Voters of Monterey County, our Lunch and Learn meeting. I'm Beverly Bean, President, and I'm delighted to see you all. I will turn it over to Janet, who organized this meeting on water, and she will introduce our speakers.
We are very fortunate today to have two people who have participated both in the Monterey Peninsula Water Supply Project, the desal proposal, and groundwater replenishment. They've been active participants in that and the settlement agreement related to that. And they are both committee members of a committee appointed to look at how Salinas Valley water, the 134 acre feet of water that needs a project in order for the county to keep it, and they have participated in that as well. Nancy is a lifelong resident of Monterey Peninsula and raised her family in Pacific Grove. And while she was raising her family, she went back to school and received a certificate in land use and environmental planning from UC Davis. She believes that our responsibility as an individual is to participate, near and dear to the League, of course, if we want to affect changes. To that end, she has served on numerous committees, and she was on the Monterey County Planning Commission for 4 years. Norm Groot is, he was started in agriculture by pulling weeds at his dad's nursery when he was 5. After receiving a degree in business accounting at the University of Southern California, he went into the family business as a treasurer, working for 14 years to expand the business. And then for Monrovia Nursery Company for 17 years. His nursery work experience includes finance, technology, and production planning. He currently serves as the executive director for Monterey County Farm Bureau, serves on the board of directors for the Salinas Valley Chamber of Commerce as the chair-elect, and participates on the Monterey Peninsula Chamber of Commerce Government Affairs Committee, and is a member of the Monterey County Integrated Waste Management Task Force. I believe Nancy is going to be first. And Nancy is a consultant, a policy consultant for the Salinas Valley Water Coalition. So we'll turn it over to you, Nancy.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you all for allowing us to come and share a topic that is near and dear to all of us. Sir, I am president, actually, of the Salinas Valley Water Coalition, and just it's a little bit about the organization. They are primarily small farmers, growers throughout the valley, Salinas Valley. And they were formed probably 22 years ago, and they were formed to really monitor the water issues of the Salinas Valleys that pertain to them, and to one of the things that they believe in is law and science and holding our government agencies accountable. And to that end, they have participated in many, many efforts. The Salinas Valley, I wanted to give you a little bit of a history as to why it's important. The Salinas Valley first, seawater intrusion was first discovered back in the early 40s. And so the Salinas Valley has been fighting and trying to resolve their problem for over 70 years. And it's more than just the agricultural industry. The Salinas Valley feeds the world, and so water is, of course, near and dear to them. Salinas Valley is 92 miles long. It goes down to San Luis Obispo county line. So we've been fighting seawater intrusion. We've built 3 projects, 2 reservoirs. We've built the recycle project, and we've also just recently built the Salinas Valley Water Project, all in an effort to stop seawater intrusion and to protect our basin. We're not there yet, The slides show we have seawater intrusion continuing in the 180-foot aquifer. This is the most recent. And you can see over time how it still continues to increase. And then you get into the 400-foot aquifer, and it is continuing to increase as well. I share this with you because it's important for people to understand we haven't solved our problem yet. We have spent millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, the Salinas Valley, to build projects to solve our problem. So it was very distressing to us to see Cal-Am wanting to come over and put their straw into the Salinas Basin. I'm a lifelong resident of the peninsula. I went through the water shortages. I was, rationed 50 gallons a person. I remember those days. We want you to solve your problem, but not at the expense and degradation of the Salinas Valley. That doesn't serve anyone well at all. And so that's why we became involved in the PUC process, and we're a party to that proceeding. The Water Coalition, part of the settlement, the reason we signed onto the settlement agreement with Cal-Am, a lot of people have said, why did you do that? We did to hold their feet to the fire and hold them accountable, quite frankly. They agreed to form a technical committee. We have 2 hydrologists and hydrogeologists that the Salinas Valley Water Coalition is paying for as part of that technical committee. The technical committee established a work plan that identifies the data that needs to be gathered and the information and the analyses that need to be completed in order to show that the project that Cal-Am is proposing will not harm the Salinas Valley River groundwater basin or its legal water right users. If it does, I'm here today to tell you with all due respect, it will not be fun. It will be litigation. We want to make sure, again, that whatever project is put forward for the peninsula isn't at the expense and degradation of the Salinas Valley. So the borings, I'm sure you all heard about the borings that are going on in Marina. They were a very important part of the technical committee's plan. We didn't take a position on whether Cal-Am need a permit or they should be exempt, but we strongly supported needing that information. The technical committee's work has not completed. We do not have all of the data. We will not have all of it until the test well is completed, which probably won't be for another year. But it's important, not only to the Salinas Valley, but it is important to you that you have the best project going forward that is put together in the most defensible package as possible, and that it does work, but it can't be at the expense of the Salinas Valley. So that's why we are part of the PUC process. And the one other part of it, I guess I would talk about, and Norm's got a couple other items he's going to talk about, but it's the groundwater replenishment. The groundwater replenishment project, goes back when each of the cities, the peninsula cities, had their own small package treatment plants, sewage treatment plants. And they were out of compliance, needed to do something. And this is my recollection, so some of it's opinion, but as I recall, nobody had the money or funding, and they couldn't, the individual cities, as to how to best build a secondary treatment plant, because they were out of compliance with the federal requirements at the time. They came to a win-win situation to where they worked with the growers of the Salinas Valley, who paid for building the tertiary treatment plant and the regional plant so that the wastewater from the peninsula could go to that plant. There were agreements in place, and in exchange for the growers paying for that, and they were guaranteed a certain amount of water from the wastewater, and that's known today, and they do use it as a recycling project in the Castroville area. It's a very, today we have a disagreement as to what those agreements actually say. There's a disagreement as to how much wastewater should be going to the growers, how much should be, is available for a replenishment project here on the peninsula. Our hope is that we will be able to resolve that issue. This is not a good year. We're in essentially the third year of the drought. And it's only exacerbated things. The wastewater going to the plant is less and less because everybody can serve. So we want to work together with the peninsula and the pollution control agency so we can resolve our differences. Nobody wins if we just continue to fight among ourselves. So thank you.
Well, Norm, I guess you get the job of talking about the 135,000 acre feet.
I'm going to talk about that as well as the Salinas River Channel. But first, I wanted to give a little bit of perspective on my background. I'm fairly new to the peninsula area here. I moved here about 3.5 years ago when I took the job at the Farm Bureau. My prior production experience was in horticulture, and coming from Orange County, if they had told me in the job interviews that all I would be doing is water, I probably would not have taken the job. But here we are, and I have stuffed my brain with all the history and everything that's gone on here relating to water, and feel that I have a fairly good grasp on it now. And Nancy's been a great mentor to me and provided a lot of background information so that I have a good perspective on this. Farm Bureau is a membership organization. We're part of a federation. We have a state organization. We have county organizations in 52 counties in California, and then we have a federal organization. So we have kind of a three-layered organization where we promote farming amongst our legislators and our regulators as well as to the public. Here in Monterey County, we have about 750 family farmers who are members, as well as people who like to eat and support Farm Bureau with memberships. So, and it's pretty important that I think that we have some unified voices that speak for agriculture in this area. We have a wide diversity of different products that are produced in the Salinas Valley and the Carmel Valley, and we think we have something that's fairly unique here. The rest of the state doesn't produce what we produce here, and we supply the world with a lot of fruits, vegetables, and leafy greens on an annual basis. So now I'm going to get into a little bit about the Salinas River Channel, and since we're here on the peninsula, a lot of people may not be aware of what's going on in the Salinas River at this point. And to put it very succinctly, nothing has gone on in the Salinas River for the last 6 years. And it's not simply due to the drought. It's due to a lack of a cohesive plan for management of the river bed itself, and it has now allowed the river to become overgrown with exotic vegetation and numerous areas where sandbars are now constraining the river much more than it has been in the past. And there's really a strong possibility of flooding along the river, similar to what we had in '95. And if you recall, at that point we had 30,000 acres of farmland that were underwater. We washed a lot of topsoil into the marine sanctuary that was really unnecessary at that point. So there's been a lot of things that we're concerned about now because of this inactivity in the river. To provide some perspective here, after the '95 flood, we went into a situation where we were issued an emergency permit so that the landowners, and along the Salinas River, I should say, we have a very unique situation where the landowners actually own the river. That's the only place it happens in California, and I think it's the only place it happens in the nation right now. So the landowners are the ones who own the river, not a federal or state agency. So after the '95 flood, the permit was issued on an emergency basis, and maintenance was done in the channel so that the water could flow consistently through and not cause further erosions of the banks. In '97, we were issued a 5-year permit for channel maintenance, which included brush control, sediment management, stream bank stabilizations, trash removal, those types of things. And we did a fairly good job. '98, we did have another flood, but it wasn't nearly as severe as what had happened. And if you look back before '95, there were 10 years where no management of the river was done. So we have that example, so to speak, now, where we're getting into that situation again, where we've had 6 years of no management. Infrastructure was lost during the '95 flood. as you recall, some of you who are living here on the peninsula were stranded for several days. So there was a lot of things that happened at that particular point that were not positive. And we want to help sustain the riverbed as not only a habitat, but also a working environment for all of us here in Monterey County. As I said, the first 5-year permit was issued in '97. Work was done under that permit, and then it was renewed in 2003. In 2008, work was stopped when the permits were not renewed. And there are a number of long stories about how and why that happened. But at this point, we haven't done anything since 2008 because the permits haven't been issued. So we're looking at a long time now where the river has really not been managed. And I think what we need to understand here is this is a meandering river. It's something that it's what created the Salinas Valley, but we also did a number of things to it to control it. In the 1940s, the Corps of Engineers built a number of dikes or levees to constrain the river and keep it in a channel. Those types of things have been done a long time ago before we even talked about habitat. So we're looking at a very man-modified river at this point. And it's exasperated now because we did take the initiative and build 2 reservoirs at the end of the county that now can release water on a year-round basis as part of the Salinas River water project, Salinas Valley water project. And so we are now promoting growth within the river or the stream bed itself by releasing this water on a 12-month basis. So we are now providing the water for this vegetation to essentially suck up. And there are estimates that at some points where it could be as much as 17,000 acre-feet, and I've heard as much as 30,000 acre-feet a year are being sucked up by this vegetation. And we can't say it's all native vegetation because the Corps of Engineers also planted arundo in that river, and arundo is a highly invasive weed. It's like a bamboo. It's taking over many of the reaches of the river at this point, and it sucks up a lot of water. We need to get rid of it. We need to manage the river so that we don't have this type of thing happening. So where are we now with this process? Back in 2012, the Monterey County Water Resource Agency introduced a draft EIR document about a channel maintenance project. At that time, we were all under the belief that it was a long-term project, and we had some very serious concerns, as did a number of other constituents who are stakeholders in this, including environmentalists, farmers, whoever. So we expressed those concerns. In comments, the final document came back. Again, we expressed concerns that that really wasn't what we wanted to do in the river. It wasn't really getting at what we needed to do to manage the river system itself. So we learned afterwards that this was more intended as a short-term project, and that this changed the dynamic considerably, and it changed the discussion all of a sudden that we're talking about a short-term project. And so we spent the last 5-6 months since November going through a process of developing a short-term project proposal that was presented to water resource agencies last month. And some of you may have heard also about the Nature Conservancy and their project that they're doing along the river, which is a pilot project. So theirs is much more focused on 7 to 8 or 10 miles of the river between Gonzales and Soledad, whereas the growers' proposal that Nancy's organization and mine and a few others were a part of focuses on all 92 miles so that we get some management of the river throughout the whole stream area. So we presented this proposal to them now, and we had a hearing last week before the Central Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. It was an all-day workshop in Salinas where a number of different panels presented their proposals, so to speak, or their viewpoints on the river. And we got a lot of support from those board members at the end of the day that we need to do something in the Salinas River. We can't just let it go the way it is. And so we have, at this point, 77 individual landowners or parcel owners, I should say, along the river who have indicated that they are willing to do work on their own dime to help manage the river and hopefully alleviate some of the risks that we have for the flooding at this point. So now we're at a point where we're waiting for water resources to look at their EIR and see what modifications they need to do there. We feel it needs to be a project EIR, excuse me, rather than a programmatic EIR, which is what they originally drafted. So some changes need to be done there. We feel that some of the mitigation measures that were thrown in there are related more towards a permanent mitigation situation rather than a temporary mitigation situation or a short-term situation. So modifications need to be there, not only to give the landowners incentives to do the work, but allow it to be in a fairly cost-efficient manner. Because remember, they're volunteering to do this on their own. It's not going to cost the taxpayer a dime to do this. So that's where we're at on the Salinas River, and we hope that we can get in getting permits from the 7 different agencies that are involved, either state or federal, sometime this summer. I know, everyone's like, oh, sure. But we're hoping that we can push this along so that we can actually get in there and do some management this fall before the rain, hopefully next year, comes. So we're kind of in this dyslexic dynamic right now. I kind of look at it. We want rain, but we don't want too much rain for the river. And so I feel like I'm constantly conflicted. So let me talk a little bit about the surface water permit in the Salinas Valley at this point, what's called the 11043 permit. And it was first established in 1957 along with a parallel or partner permit that was also done for municipal uses. So there was an agricultural permit and a municipal permit at that time. And the intent was to develop water projects under these permits that provided flood control and to combat seawater intrusion in the Salinas River Basin, Salinas groundwater basin, excuse me. The first projects that were built were the reservoirs, and those were actually built under a separate permit, so they never really fell under this 11043 permit. And so we still have that water under 11043 that's not really tied to the reservoirs. The permits were combined in 1982 to make the 11043 permit, so we now have one permit that has both uses in it. And at that time, projects were listed that included a dam on the Arroyo Seco River. Pause. Water diversion points are near Soledad and Salinas for an east side canal project, and also for a Castroville canal project. Those are what's listed in the permit at this point. We were originally at 168,000 acre feet, and they were granted an extension. The Water Resource Agency was granted an extension in 2008, and so the permit continued, but no projects have been built under that permit up to that point, and still haven't. So they announced in 2012, the State Water Resources Control Board announced that because nothing had been done, that they were considering revoking the permit. And that's when we all, as organizations in the Salinas Valley, came together and started talking about what can we do, first of all, to defend the permit, how much water is left in the permit after you look at all the different uses, and is it worth defending, first of all? And second, if it is, what projects are the most suitable at this point that get us the best bang for our buck, so to speak? So a committee was formed called the Regional Advisory Committee, of which Nancy and I were members, as well as a few others that just walked into the room who are now closing Margie. The door. Hi, Margie. And we convened and had monthly meetings and started talking about, first of all, how we could defend the permit, and then what we were going to do with the water. In July of 2013, the State Water Board and the Water Resources Agency reached what is called a settlement of extension on the permit that reduced the permit itself to the 135,000 acre feet that we have now. We don't know where all that water went, but it's not there anymore. And it's based only on sufficient winter flows at the diversion points during certain months of the year. So it's extremely limited as to when we can divert the water now. And specific milestones were laid out in this settlement, the first of which is coming up this July. And I'll talk about that in just a little bit. So the RAC, as I call it, the Regional Advisory Committee, met every month, and we've been working on developing a permit. And our mission, as we put it in a purpose statement, was to find a project that fits within the permit without modification. Meaning we have to use the diversion points that are listed, look at the projects that are listed, and those are the ones that we're going to consider. So we've been going back and forth on this, and in December it was disclosed that in a November 5th closed session meeting of our Board of Supervisors with the Water Resource Agency under what they call a performance evaluation, they instructed the Water Resource Agency personnel to explore the possibility of becoming a water purveyor and selling the water either to the peninsula or to some other municipality. That got us a little upset, as you can imagine. We've been having these meetings for over a year. We've been talking about the different projects. Not once did they come to us and talk about that. And these are public meetings. These are meetings that are noticed. The press is there every time. It was a very public process. If there was something they wanted to bring to us, then they could have called a closed session and figured something out or some other way to tell us. So let's get back now to the milestones. This July, we have to present a notice of project to the State Water Board, which means we have to basically outline the project that we think is going to be the one or multiple projects that are going to work for us and the ones that we are going to pursue building, which we have to build by 2024. So we're going to do our best to meet that deadline. We're coming up pretty close on this. We expect that the RAC will meet again at the end of this month and hopefully make that recommendation. It will go to the Water Resource Agency Board of Directors, and then it will go to the Board of Supervisors for a final recommendation. So we're getting a little tight on the timeline, but hopefully we can still make it and get it done. So that's a little bit about where we're at on the Salinas River and also on the 11043 permit.
I just wanted to add something on the 11043 because I think it's still really misunderstood. We still do not know today how much water truly is available. You know, everyone says 135,000 acre feet. Oh my gosh, that's so much water. We were told in a meeting that it would take could capture that water on an average annual basis of I think it was 55,000 acre feet a year. So, and you could capture the water 3 out of 10 years. And so, you know, if you look at this year, there's not going to be any water for delivery. Last year, there wouldn't have been any water for delivery. And so if you look at it, you need to look at it. It's not 135,000 acre feet that's just sitting there for the taking. And then the other piece of this that we were also told, in order to stop seawater intrusion into the Salinas Valley, it would take an average annual of 56,000 acre feet a year. So you have to understand our position that everyone looks at this, the 135,000 acre feet, oh my gosh, the peninsula just needs a little bit. Yes, you do. But we need a lot too, and we need to be able to look at this as to how much is available and for use. So thank you.
Well, that is excellent background information, and I'm going to open it up for questions. Sylvia?
I need some clarification. I am getting a little bit lost in that you said the farmers actually on the riverbank owns that portion of the river. But how come they couldn't band together, do whatever clearance of the river every time you have to go for the permit? That's one thing. Second, when the permit is given for doing whatever, there are projects. Who's responsible for carrying out the projects? You came back and said, by 2008, nothing was done. Who's responsible for getting nothing done?
All right, so the first question was related to the ownership of the river, and this goes back to the Spanish land grant days when the area was divided up into haciendas and the river was still meandering, and so the river has moved through various different parcels over the years, and so it never became public ownership. So that's the first thing there. So it is the responsibility of the landowners, essentially, to take care of their property, and they want to protect their property. As we've gone through the various different decades and enacted a lot of environmental laws, we've come into a situation where any management of a river or stream bed has to be permitted, either by the state Water Resources Agency or the Water Resources Agency here in the county, as well as the State Water Resources Control Board, the Central Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board, the Corps of Engineers, Fish and Game, Fish and Wildlife. It goes on. There are 7 different agencies that are involved here now, and they all have different jurisdictions, and they all have different missions, so you can imagine there's a lot of conflicts. So what happened in 2008 to make a long story short, is the negative declaration that was used for the projects in 1997 and 2003 for the issuing of the permits there was not continued, and they were told locally here that they needed to do full environmental impact report on the stream bed itself in order to determine what the impacts were for all beneficial uses. So that's where we got hung up in 2008. The permit was never renewed, and so it became a point of inactivity, and that makes it illegal for the landowners to go into the stream bed and do any type of maintenance, including removing large items of trash. So you have now also 7 or 8 years worth of trash in the river too. So landowners have been very reluctant to do anything for these last years because of that particular situation. So that kind of explains why we're in the situation we're in right now.
How about the responsibility for the not doing anything with the 1143 permit?
The 11043 permit, and Nancy can probably provide the historical perspective on that one, maybe.
It never was renewed in 2008. It actually, they had they'd filed for a petition, and then they were given extra time to request an extension. Kind of fell through the cracks, this is my belief, and I think because of the change of what took place at the Water Resource Agency during that time. Because nothing had occurred, they actually were given notice in 2010, the county, that the state board was going to proceed with revocation. And it did take till 2012. I know the Farm Bureau and my organization, the Water Coalition, were parties to that proceeding, the revocation proceeding. And that's why one of the reasons we were part of the RAC committee. We never knew that any settlement discussions were going on. We were never informed, and yet we were even parties to the proceeding. And so no one knew until the settlement had been signed and it changed significantly. And so we understand that, you can't discuss confidential matters. I mean, that absolutely should be the case. But I think the failure to communicate, if I could, was that they failed to even tell us that they were having these discussions. And that's created a large gap and mistrust of those people who are on the committee and with the county, both at the Board of Directors for the Water Resource Agency and with all due respect to the Board of Supervisors.
Roger?
You mentioned, Nancy, that the results from the test well, the slant well, won't be available until maybe a year from now. And yet, next fall, the CalAm and the PUC have scheduled the presentation of a draft environmental impact report. And it seems like they're just not going to know what the environmental impact is by then. Are you aware of that? Does the Salinas Valley people concerned about that?
We are concerned. Thank you. It's a good question. We are concerned, and that's been one of our concerns from the beginning, is that how could you have really the best environmental document and one that's the most defensible for whatever project is put forward. Having said that, my understanding is that most of the data, which is why the EIR is pushed back to fall now, but so we'll have the data from the borings, and we'll have some other data available, and they'll be able to do some modeling. It will set some parameters as to establish if there is an impact or not, but we really won't know. So in other words, they could do the EIR, but you really won't have all of your hard scientific data until you complete that test well. And the test well most likely will have to run for a year, maybe 2 years. I think the Coastal Commission wants it to go for 2 years. So we really won't know. We really won't know. You can have a model, but as everyone knows, models they're based on as good of information as put in, and we don't really know until we have the actual data.
I'll just add to that. That has been one of the points that we have repeatedly made at the PUC, is that the environmental impacts from the source well intakes have to be included in the EIR, and they need to be in the draft EIR. So we've repeated that request in front of the ALJ a number of times at different hearings. We actually got slapped down one time because we did it inappropriately, but we have consistently maintained that that EIR in draft form has to contain as much information as it possibly can so that it becomes defensible. If it's not defensible, we're all going to be in for a bigger challenge.
Mm-hmm. Amy?
This question's for Nancy. Nancy, can you help me understand the seemingly sort of different positions of the Salinas Valley Water Coalition in regards to Salinas Valley Water? For instance, the lawsuit and the general plan that you guys filed was settled with the statement that there's a long-term sustainable water in the Salinas Valley. But then during these proceedings, you know, there's a lot of like, you know, we're still in trouble, the problems haven't been solved yet, and I can't seem to make sense of those two different positions. Could you help me make sense of that?
I'll try. The lawsuit with the general plan was based on what was promised, and it was a contract promise with the county and the assessments that are paid. And that promise included the availability of a secure water supply to 2030. Okay, that's very different than stopping seawater intrusion. We're not there yet. We may be by 2030. You've got to look at it as a whole, not a snapshot. And people tend very often to look at things in a snapshot. If you looked at things today, they're pretty bad in Salinas Valley because of the drought. They're pretty bad over here. But you've got to look at it as a whole. So what we had said as a whole, based on the Salinas Valley Water Project, there would be an adequate water supply to 2030. Now I will tell you, having said that, one of the terms of the settlement was that the county do a study, which starts I think in 2017, to study this and determine, to analyze it. Is the project working or is it not? Because if it's not working, we need to know that so that we can know what we need to do to move forward. So thank you.
Cynthia?
I'd like clarification on a point. I live in Carmel Valley, and it seems like every Tom, Dick, and Harry moves in and is putting in a winery. And it's my understanding that when they do that, that's classified as ag use. And to me, wine is not food. So I would just like...
Grape production is agriculture, so and you have to understand too that a large portion of the wine that's produced is not done here. The grapes are exported and the processing is actually done in other counties. So we have very few wineries that are self-sufficient and do that production here themselves. So the water use that they're using is on the grapevines itself, and grape growers have made tremendous strides in using drip tape and managing their water systems very well. So grape is not considered a intensive water use under agriculture.
Bob?
I guess to both of you, I have a sense of contradiction in your response to this question about the EIR. Because, in fact, I think we're looking at a situation where you're not, you know, as you say, models are going to be based on incomplete data. You know, modelers always say, you know, all models are wrong, some models are useful. But you're not going to have adequate data until long after the EIR is approved. This to me seems, and this is the part I haven't heard you address, this seems to me to open a barn by door for you folks to secure your water rights.
I think we would both agree with you. You're absolutely right. You have to understand the PUC process is actually the proceeding for CalAm to approve CalAm's project is held by one division, and then it's another division, believe it or not, it's the energy division of the PUC that's in charge of the environmental document. And we, as Norm said, we have argued, and there are others who are there arguing too. We think that the data needs to be completed before you will have an adequate EIR. That's not in our control. We can make the argument, and we'll continue to make that argument. And if, unfortunately, when the EIR comes out in fall, if it doesn't address some of those things, there will be a battle, and that doesn't serve anybody well.
Harvey.
You know, a couple points. I appreciate what you're pointing out, the water availability issue. Now, one is that Nasvieno's now at 23% of capacity, despite these rains we just had, and 15,500 acre feet are scheduled to go to San Luis Obispo County via pipe, which is installed. And by the way, that was done by public companies before, ahead of schedule, et cetera. Okay, so that water as more of that's taken, when a treatment plant is built, it's under construction in Paso Robles and Templeton, they'll be taking more of that 15,500 acre feet that they're at first claim to over other uses. Now, with all this in mind, we have this long process. People could accuse public water now of delaying the process or something like that. There's a lot of delay right here. And what I can't understand is why in the process you don't look at what happened in Santa Cruz. Now Santa Cruz is a public, they've studied this. They spent $12 million on an EIR. Included in that was a study of screening for deep water intake and what kind of organisms actually entered. And then they did slant wells. So they did trial slant wells. All that's available. The whole EIR is available online. We're now delaying this, and your concerns are very real, and nobody wants saltwater intrusion. So what I can't understand is why that data, which I think is very comparable to this area, isn't taken into account here, and why shouldn't we climb on board with the people that are trying to do Dana Point? Now, putting this in perspective, there's 20-some desal plants proposed in the entire coast, and this coastal commission is trying to get a common approach to this. Okay. Now, right now they're in an impasse because the technical people in Dana Point who are pushing for deep water intake have said that they've tested the slant wells, that they just don't, that they think this is the thing that should happen. So that the hearings have been delayed. But I think it would be important for Monterey County to climb on board and say, and get these people, the consultants that are working on Dana Point over here, let's get a common policy. Let's have deep water intake with proper screening to prevent biological material from coming in, and let's not have saltwater intrusion. End of story.
So the question is, why is not CalAm considering deep water intake as an alternative to taking water out of the Salinas Valley groundwater basin? I don't know if either of you want to respond to that.
I'll try it, so don't throw rocks. I think we have said all along that we feel a open ocean deep water intake is a possibility here, and that there is science to support that. I think what we have to realize too is that the EIR that's being prepared in this project is being prepared by the PUC, by their staff. They are required to look at all other projects and all the science involved. So I would suspect that they are going to include some of that already known science. But the point being here too is that we have a proposal to drill over a groundwater basin that has specific rights to it, and that is where we became involved, and that's why I think this has become such a point with the PUC, is that they want to make sure that they get as much data as they can. And while we still maintain that there's other possibilities besides slant wells and marina, other locations or other methods, I think they're looking at all possibilities and will hopefully include all that science.
Couple more questions. Beverly?
Thank you. This is a question for Norm. It's my understanding that the reason for saltwater intrusion is overpumping of the aquifer served by the Salinas River, just as the Carmel Valley is overpumped. And the seawater comes in because you're pumping out so much water. With that in mind, it's a two-part question. As far as pumping so much water, are best practices being used in the Salinas Valley as far as metering the water that's being pumped by agriculture, as far as sprinklers versus drip irrigation? In other words, what kind of conservation measures, best practices are used, and are they required? And the second part is, in the projects you mentioned for the 135,000 acre-feet, presumptive acre-feet of water, you mentioned several projects, and the diversion is to save the water that would otherwise run to the ocean. Are all the diversion projects aimed at replenishing the aquifer? Are you going to put that water back to replenish the aquifer to try to fight seawater intrusion? I mean, selling it doesn't seem to help seawater intrusion. So I need clarification.
Okay, so both answers are yes. So let me explain. On the question about the imbalance in the groundwater basin, that was discovered in the 1940s, and that was prior to any projects being built by the growers to start combating saltwater intrusion. So what you have to look back at is the historical perspective of how the basin was working at that time, where you had a groundwater basin, you had a river that flowed maybe 3 months of the year and was dry the rest of the time. So there was no groundwater recharge to offset that pumping at that point. That's when the growers started taking the initiative to build the reservoirs, to start storing the water so that they could do the groundwater recharge for the basin as they pumped it out. And if you look at the charts now, we are slowing saltwater intrusion considerably because of the Salinas River or Salinas Valley Water Project being in place now for 2 years or 3 years. But those are all very early indications. But what we've done is starting to work and is starting to stop that process. Now the trick is to develop a project that will start pushing the salt water back into the ocean. And yes, the diversion of those waters from that permit will be used for projects that will go into, particularly in the east side of Salinas, where they have a cone of depression, where they really need to start building that gradient going back towards the ocean rather than the other way. So that's what we've maintained as our purpose on the RAC committee, and that's why we sit here and argue every meeting that we want a project that does what it's supposed to do in that water permit, which is start working on saltwater intrusion. Now, about best management practices, Salinas Valley growers have been early adopters of water management techniques. Over 60% of our irrigated fields, of the 220,000 acre that are currently under irrigated cultivation, are on drip irrigation. That is a standard practice that everybody uses now. There are some crops where that just doesn't work, and they are working on techniques to improve that. There are other ways of delivering water too, but we are very cognizant of our water resources here and have done a lot to get away from the rainbird and flood irrigation that has been typical of many other areas of California. So you have to look at it in the perspective that we have worked all those resources as best we can, whether we built projects to recharge the groundwater basin or we conserve water. I think what's important to remember here is we're using less water now than we were 20 years ago, and we're producing 3 times what we were producing in yield. So we have become much more efficient with the water that we're using.
So the growers are using meters. Water is
Oh yeah, I meant to answer that. Their water is reported, their water use is reported every year to the Water Resource Agency. That is recorded, and so groundwater is managed by report on meters.
George? My question maybe is between a rock and a hard place. I'm trying to think of a water analogy. I guess bog and swamp, maybe as close as it gets. I'm concerned about the deadline. You said that you need to come up with an actual project by 2024, and it's 2014, so you have 10 years. Now the peninsula, maybe it's not the same, but I don't see a lot of differences between politics, the interest groups, and the demands that are made on everybody, because we've had an order on us since '95, so it's been 17 years, and we're still working towards solution. 17 years. Now you've got a 10-year window. And I'm wondering about all the planning that needs to be done, all the decisions that need to be made, and all the project design that's required costs money. And nobody has commented yet on how you get the money. Now, the rock and the hard place question is, you have access to some water rights that could be sold. It may not help your groundwater intrusion, but how do you balance the need for money for your projects compared to selling some of your water in order to get the money to finance your projects? Because I'm reading that the county's in debt, just read that today. The Water Resources Agency doesn't have any money. The property owners over there aren't willingly coming forward to finance any of these projects, at least I haven't heard any of it. And so the technique for financing seems to me to be the water rights that you have. And how does that play into the financing?
Okay, so that was a lot. 2026 is when the project has to be built and completed. I misspoke, so if I said 10 years, it's actually 12. I believe it's 2026. So we have specific milestones that have been laid out in the settlement that we have to meet, and so we have a track in which we have to work off of if we propose a project. and do that notification this summer. I think the best way I would characterize this is if you look at the history of the Salinas Valley, the agricultural community has come together to fund all the projects. We paid in dollars, today's dollars, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $330 million to build our projects. This newer project obviously is going to be much more expensive. It's going to cost a lot of money to do whatever we want to do. And so we're going to have to decide whether it's going to be self-funded within our community, or we are going to look at some sort of solution that offers water to municipality, that can offer some sort of purchase, such as the city of Salinas, and get them off their groundwater wells. That has two impacts. You get them out of the groundwater basin, so you stop the pumping on a 12-year basis or 12-month basis from the city of Salinas. That improves, hopefully, the pressure on that side of the basin, and you're getting money for selling water to the municipality. That's one particular solution, and it could possibly fit within the permit if it's designed correctly. So we have to look at the nuances of that and decide how that works. But there are a number of different ways that this can be done, and I think financing is going to be a challenge. Also, I think getting something through the community is going to be a challenge. I don't think we should minimize that at all, but we do have a history of building projects and getting things done. So I think you have to look at it that way too. I think, now don't throw rocks again. I think that from what I understand, the community on this side of the county has had multiple choices over the years and has turned them down, whereas the Salinas Valley has not. We've taken charge. So I think you have to look at it in two different perspectives.
I'd like to add something on the selling. Selling that water right, if you think of it as that water right has been there and it's been held in abeyance for the Salinas Valley, and if you sell that off without the approval, I will tell you, you are going to have a fight from the Salinas Valley, first of all. And two, we still don't know how much water is, and then is it actually available, and then it's the process. It's not as easy as saying, oh, we've got 135,000 on this permit, and so now we're going to go sell it. It doesn't work that way, and I with all due respect, and I just will tell you, if soon as, and that's why everyone was up in arms, you start talking about selling that water right, you will have an absolute outright water rights adjudication of the Salinas Valley, and nobody will win except the attorneys, with all due respect. And because I will tell you, my members, absolutely. And Norm and I have worked through this process. We try to encourage them. We've got to solve our own problems, but they will fight. They absolutely will fight that.
I'm going to take the privilege of the last question. In terms of groundwater replenishment, other sources for groundwater replenishment water include the wash water on Davis Road. There's 100 acres of water 8 feet deep that comes from washing vegetables. It's good quality water. There's that potential source. There's also the source of stormwater runoff from the city of Salinas. Could I ask either of you to address your position on the use of that water for groundwater replenishment?
I think the first thing for groundwater replenishment is we need to resolve our agreements. There's a difference as to the agreements. I think I mentioned that. And if some of us believe that even the Third Amendment says that once the debt's paid, and remember it's the Salinas Valley that's paying the debt on the plant, but once the debt's paid, let's say 2035, if that happened today, everything that comes, all the wastewater that comes from the peninsula, stays on the peninsula. Everything that comes from Salinas Valley stays in Salinas Valley. So now you're talking about taking some water, even though it's wash water, but it's from the Salinas Valley, that after 2035, if you read, some interpret the agreement, it should be staying there. Could it be used? Yes. Could we resolve our, I think we can resolve our differences, but unfortunately we've come to an impasse, and I think that the Pollution Control Agency is going to seek arbitration, which I'm not sure that's going to serve anybody, but so I think we need to resolve the differences on the agreements first.
I would like to thank both of our speakers today. I think we've received an invaluable perspective and lots of very good information, and please give them a hand.